The U.S. military has said that it would begin a blockade of all Iranian ports hours after collapse of talks.
This comes as Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Tehran was just inches away from a deal with Washington in Islamabad.
The U.S. Central Command announced that the blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of foreign nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Now, the statement said that the restrictions will come into effect at 10 a.m. Eastern Time.
The U.S. Central Command clarified that it would not impede vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports, and that further instructions for mariners would be forthcoming.
Now, Iran's Revolutionary Guards have declared that they are in full control of traffic through Hormuz and warned that they would trap any challenger in a deadly vortex.
The announcement came despite a ceasefire in place that is aimed at pausing the 6-week war until April 22, with tensions centered on whether the U.S. can force Iran to reopen the strategic Strait of Hormuz, another of its key demands in the stalled negotiations. Washington has even put the onus of failed talks on Islamic Republic's refusal to abandon its nuclear ambitions.
Now, earlier Trump warned that the naval blockade against Iran is imminent. Trump also said that he expects Iranians to return to the bargaining table and give U.S. everything it seeks. Upon his arrival at the Joint Base Andrews, Trump suggested that Iran is in very bad shape and is desperate.
I think Iran is in very bad shape. I think they're very desperate. We had a meeting that lasted 21 hours. We understand the situation better than anybody, and Iran's in very bad shape. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. Will not have. There is no way that they're going to get. They still want it, and they made that clear the other night. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon.
Well, Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Tehran's delegation in Pakistan, said on returning home that the country would not bow to any threats from Washington, while Navy Chief Shahram Irani called Trump's blockade threat ridiculous.
Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Iran engaged with U.S. in good faith to end the war, but encountered maximalism, shifting goalposts, and blockade.
Well, the two sides also failed to reach agreement on the U.S. demand that Iran cease funding for Hamas, Hezbollah and the Houthis, as well as fully open the Strait of Hormuz. On the other hand, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance arrived back in the United States after leading the U.S. delegation in marathon talks with Iran.
Now, U.S. officials said Iran had rejected Washington's call for an end to all uranium enrichment, the dismantling of all major enrichment facilities, and the transfer of highly enriched uranium.
Well, to discuss more, we are now being joined live by David Dakim from Washington, D.C. He's former Undersecretary of Defense in George W. Bush administration and currently Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome to WION, Professor.
Good evening to you. I guess it's good evening to us, and good morning to you.
Well, the IRGC says the Strait of Hormuz, it remains open for now after this ceasefire, of course. And President Trump, on the other hand, he spoke of an immediate sweeping blockade there. On the other hand, U.S. Central Command later outlined a narrower operation beginning on Monday. So we clearly see that there is a contradiction in what President says and in what the CENTCOM says. So even if the blockade is limited and targeted, it would still affect one of the most vital waterways in the world. And when the President and the Pentagon seemingly tell two different stories in the middle of a war, which story usually matters more? I'd really like to know, especially considering your experience with a previous U.S. administration.
Well, look, first of all, as Central Command pointed out, any ships entering the Gulf after the blockade begins that are not headed for Iran will be able to get to their destinations, which means, of course, Kuwait and Qatar and so on, Saudi Arabia as well. So that already changes the nature of the oil question. What this blockade will do, and by the way, let me make it clear. I think the United States Navy will be able to have this blockade. I think the Persians, the Iranians are basically bragging about something because they hope they can psychologically get the world to the United States to stop, or get the United States itself to stop. They they simply don't have the wherewithal. The IRGC Navy, the Revolutionary Guard Navy, with its small boats, this is something that the Central Command has been aware of for decades, because this is something that the IRGC has practiced. I think they'll be blown out of the water, quite frankly. And what will happen instead is that Iran's ability to get any kind of revenue, say, from places like China, is going to be much more difficult. And frankly, it's going to pressure the Chinese as well, because some 20% of their oil comes from the Gulf. And they will have to turn to countries other than Iran to get the oil that they need. This is going to put Iran in a very difficult position. Yes, the price of oil is going to go up. There's no doubt about that. How far up it goes remains to be seen. Mr. Trump believes that this is a relatively short-term business, and quite frankly, it's difficult to see how the Iranians could hold out against an extended blockade.
And that being said, as you mentioned, of course, when it comes to the economic damage to many countries, it includes Europe as well. It includes China, as you mentioned. And well, it also does for U.S. Now, of course, it was Trump itself who said that we're going to get this open and had alleged Iran for blocking this, which is against international law. But he's doing the same. And again, we don't know if it's short-term or long-term, because even the war, according to Trump, was supposed to be just for 2-3 weeks or maximum 4, and it has extended more. Do you think this is an escalation?
Well, I don't know if it's an escalation or not. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Iranians have been taking a beating. This is just another form of that beating, quite frankly. And the Iranians want the United States essentially to agree to their 10-point plan, which would have allowed them to continue their missile program, to continue their support of proxies, to continue their nuclear development program, essentially, and to get money from the United States. And so essentially what the Iranians were asking for was a maximalist position that essentially rejected everything the United States wanted. Mr. Trump has adopted his own maximalist position, and so you have a good reason why after 21 hours, Mr. Vance was not able to get very far. I know the Iranians are saying they were close, but it's hard to see that both sides were close if nothing that the United States wanted was going to be agreed to. And so at the end of the day, yes, it's possible the blockade could go on for some time. I have my doubts about that. It just seems to me that Iran, having been hit as hard as it's been hit, will now suffer even more damage, economic damage, and who knows what else the United States is going to do. Mr. Trump has the ability to surprise people from one day to the next. If I were in Tehran, I would think very, very strongly about sitting down again with Washington and being much more flexible than they've been. They seem to be under an illusion, quite honestly, that Washington will give way. Perhaps they think this is what they got out of Mr. Obama or Mr. Biden or whoever. Trump's a very different character, and the last thing he wants to be seen as a loser. It's the worst word in his vocabulary. And if he does not get most of what he wants, he will be seen as a loser, and he simply will not agree to that.
Dov, you say that Iranians have been taking a beat. Now, if we talk about the recent talks that have failed, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says the talks in Islamabad had almost brought both sides inches away from an agreement. Yet, within hours, Washington pivoted to announcing a naval blockade. We do know there were a couple of contentious points, including Hormuz, nuclear capabilities, and even economic sanctions, especially Lebanon as well. But what do you think happened in that room that took this from, let's say, handshake distance to warship distance? Who was taking the beating there?
Well, it just seems to me that, first of all, as I said, the foreign minister was exaggerating when he said they were inches away. I mean, clearly what Iran was offering was nothing what Mr. Trump wanted to get. Now, the question then becomes, how long did it take before the United States realized they were getting nowhere? Remember that before all of this started, when there were still talks before the American and Israeli attack, Mr. Witkoff and Jared Kushner both realized that Iran had no intention of cutting back on its nuclear program. And when they offered that Iran's uranium could be shipped elsewhere and then essentially brought back for domestic purposes, the Iranians rejected that, and Witkoff and Kushner concluded that Iran really wanted to go ahead with a nuclear program. Now, it just seems to me that after 21 hours, Mr. Vance, and of course Witkoff and Kushner were both there as well, Mr. Vance concluded that Iran had not moved off its basic position. And in fact, as I mentioned, there was no Iranian willingness to consider pulling back on its support for proxies. There was no Iranian willingness to even address the missile question, and not to mention, of course, the nuclear issue. And so it just seems to me that the definition of inches varies very wildly between what the Foreign Minister of Pakistan said about inches and what the American negotiators consider to be inches.